Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. You know, when I was growing up, I remember that there seemed to be this never-ending debate in the tactical community about what was better to carry for self-defense, a revolver or an automatic. You know, proponents of the automatic would argue that the higher capacity and faster reload times made it the clear choice for tactical operations and self-defense. Proponents of the revolver would argue that it was more reliable and that because the automatic was prone to malfunctions and susceptible to dirt, it was not suitable for self-defense, and that made the revolver the clear choice. Well, it seems that that debate has more or less ended. At least, I don't really hear people actively discussing it much anymore. It seems like the tactical community now has wholeheartedly embraced modern automatics as sort of the status quo for self-defense. And that led me to assume for a number of years that modern automatics simply have advanced to the point where they are now just as reliable as revolvers ever were, and that had sort of settled the issue once and for all. Well, then I saw a couple of videos on InRange TV where they did some mud testing with a number of automatic pistols. They did a mud test with a World War II era 1911, and while the mud did cause some malfunctions, they were able to restore it to functionality and get it working again pretty easily. Then they mud tested a Glock 19, a much more modern handgun. And it seized up and could not be restored to function by any field expedient measures. So then I did a search on YouTube for, handgun mud tests and found that a lot of other people had tested a lot of other modern handguns and generally got about the same results. A lot of modern handguns actually seem to be very susceptible to external dirt. Now, they may be highly reliable in a range scenario because modern ammunition generates very little actual fouling. But if there's an external source of dirt, like, say, dropping the gun in the mud, that can create serious problems for modern automatic pistols. I'm sure some take it more than others, but in general, it does still seem to be an issue. So that begs the question, in light of this age-old debate, are revolvers really any more dirt tolerant than our modern automatics? So to answer that question, I want to mud test a revolver today. Now, one concern with mud testing anything is bore obstructions. You don't want to fill the barrel with mud and, cause a dangerous scenario there. So what's often done is plug the muzzle with a foam earplug, and that itself will not create a dangerous bore obstruction, but it will keep out the mud and so forth that might. However, in the case of a revolver, we also have the cylinder to think about. The front of the chambers are exposed, at least on the sides, and that creates a potential for mud getting in there and creating something very similar to a bore obstruction once that chamber in the cylinder is aligned with the barrel. So there's a couple of different ways that we might be able to address that. For starters, I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and mud the gun, and then when I pick it up out of the mud, I will just sling it back and forth a few times, try to shake any mud that might be in the cylinder out, and then we'll clamp it in a vise and test it remotely for safety's sake. Now, this is a .357 Magnum revolver. Specifically, it's a Llama Comanche III. So I'm going to go ahead and fire a couple of rounds just to prove that it works. Now, we'll go ahead and plug it with our foam earplug to keep mud out of the barrel, and we'll get it dirty. Okay, well, I think it's safe to say that the Llama Comanche III failed our mud test. Parts are frozen up. The minute I get one broken loose, something else malfunctions. I have not been able to get a shot off, with this thing clamped in my proof testing vise. So I think I'm going to have to take it apart and clean it and see what it takes to restore functionality here. So it looks to me like regardless of whether you carry a revolver or an automatic, if you should happen to drop your gun in the mud in the middle of a gunfight, you're probably going to be in serious trouble. But there's another scenario that I think also bears investigation, and that is, what if the gun is still holstered and you fall in the mud, or you have to crawl through the mud for some reason? How will that affect its performance? Because the holster should prevent mud from getting, up into the barrel, or in the case of a revolver, into the cylinder, but it still leaves the top of the gun exposed where mud can get into the mechanism, and especially if it's getting dragged through the mud in the holster, that could still be a serious ingress point for dirt and debris into the mechanism. So, before our mud hole dries out, let me go ahead and try dragging my Smith & Wesson 629 in an appendix carry holster through the mud, and then we'll see if that retains any functionality after being subjected to that level of dirt. So once again, I'm going to start by firing a couple rounds just to prove the gun works. And then we'll crawl through the mud hole and see if that compromises its functionality. Well, that went a little bit better. I was able to fire all 4 remaining shells in the cylinder. So it's possible that the Smith & Wesson is a little bit better built than the Llama, or it's possible that the holster protected it and prevented it from jamming up more seriously. That said, I still did get a lot of what I perceived to be light strikes. I feel like I had to run the cylinder through 4 or 5 complete revolutions to get those 4 shots off. So the gun is not impervious to mud either. Anyway, I've got some guns to clean and need to go change my clothes, but hopefully you found this video educational, and until next time, thank you for watching The Idahoan Show.